The crystal chandelier cast dancing shadows across the dining room as my father's hands connected with my shoulders, shoving me backward so hard that I stumbled into the antique credenza. The sound of shattering glass, my grandmother's vase, echoed through the suddenly silent room. 12 guests gasped in unison. My mother stood frozen, one hand clutching her wineglass, the other pressed against her chest in mock horror. My younger brother, Jason, just looked away because he knew exactly why this was happening. 10 minutes earlier, my parents had demanded I sign over the deed to my $900,000 luxury home. Not asked, demanded. In front of everyone, like I owed them my entire life because they'd contributed DNA to my existence. When I said no, my father's face turned crimson, the veins in his temple pulsing with barely controlled rage. "After everything we've sacrificed for you," he hissed, his voice low and dangerous. "After all the money we've invested in your future." "We need to talk about that investment," I interrupted, my voice surprisingly steady despite the fear coursing through my veins. That's when he pushed me. Hard. Violent. In front of witnesses who suddenly found the pattern on their plates absolutely fascinating. The room went silent, except for my mother's carefully orchestrated gasp. I could feel the bruise already forming on my hip where I'd hit the furniture, see the pity mixed with relief in the guests' eyes, relief that they weren't the target, pity that was utterly useless. So I walked out, got in my Tesla, and made one phone call to a man I'd been preparing to contact for 3 years. Exactly 2 hours later, he walked into that Christmas dinner like a well-dressed storm system. The moment my father saw who he was, every ounce of color drained from his face. He actually took 2 steps backward, knocking into Mrs. Henderson from the country club, because this man knew everything. And I mean everything. What my parents tried to do to me didn't start that Christmas evening. It started when I was 19 years old, standing in a bank office, trying to understand why I couldn't open a simple checking account. And over the next 90 minutes, in front of all their carefully curated friends, their perfectly constructed facade would shatter like that antique vase. But that was just the beginning of my revenge. Stay with me, because what happened next? They never saw it coming. My name is Rebecca Sullivan. I'm 35 years old, and for the past 12 years, I've built a career in commercial architecture and property development, designing mixed-use buildings and converting historic properties into modern spaces that actually serve their communities. I did it all on my own, not a single dollar from my family, which is exactly how I wanted it. Because accepting help from Thomas and Catherine Sullivan always came with strings attached. And those strings had a way of transforming into chains that tightened every time you tried to move forward. The Christmas lights at my parents' estate that night were the expensive kind, the ones that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Synchronized LED displays wrapped around every column, outlined every window, transformed their Georgian colonial into something that belonged on the cover of Architectural Digest's holiday issue. Inside, the house smelled like imported cinnamon candles and roasted duck, expensive wine and old money. The dining table could seat 16, and probably cost as much as a luxury car. But beneath all that carefully curated holiday perfection, the atmosphere was cold enough to give you frostbite. I should have known better than to come. I'd told myself this year would be different, that maybe after building my career and proving my worth, they'd finally see me as an equal instead of an asset to be managed. Instead, the moment I walked through the door in my navy cocktail dress, elegant but not showy, professional but approachable, my mother, Catherine, took one look at me and said, "Oh, Rebecca. Good. You're here. The caterer needs someone to coordinate the dessert service. Could you handle that? Not, 'Merry Christmas.' Not, 'We're glad you came.' Just an assignment." My younger brother, Jason, was already holding court in the study, surrounded by my father's business associates. He was 28, still living in our parents' pool house, and working some vague consultant position at our father's investment firm that seemed to involve a lot of expensive lunches and very little actual work. When I walked past carrying the dessert coordination timeline the caterer had given me, he barely glanced up from whatever story he was telling that had the men laughing and slapping their knees. "That's the older daughter," I heard someone murmur to their companion. "The architect. Rebecca, I think. Quite serious. Not like Jason. Now there's a young man with real potential. I'd heard variations of this narrative my entire life. Jason was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong even when he did everything wrong. I was the responsible one, the one who showed up and met expectations and never caused embarrassing scenes at the country club. What they didn't know, what none of them knew, was that while Jason was burning through a trust fund that didn't actually exist anymore and racking up credit card debt our parents quietly paid off, I'd been building an empire. 12 completed commercial projects across 4 states. A property portfolio worth over $3.2 million. And yes, a custom-designed luxury home worth $900,000 that I lived in. A home I'd conceptualized, financed, and built myself through years of strategic planning and smart investments. Well, almost entirely by myself. The truth was more complicated, but it was a truth only I knew. As the evening wore on, I moved through the party like background noise, refilling wine glasses, directing the catering staff, nodding politely when people asked what I was up to these days, in that tone that suggested they expected the answer to be something small and forgettable. My father, Thomas, commanded the room like he always did, his booming voice carrying across the space as he told stories about his investment wins, his important connections, his latest acquisition. My mother floated between conversation clusters, touching arms, air-kissing cheeks, making sure everyone saw how perfect her life was, how successful her family was. Then, just as the main course was being cleared, my father stood up and tapped his wine glass with a knife. The room fell silent immediately. He had that look on his face, the one that meant he was about to make an announcement, about to assert his authority over whatever situation needed his control. "Rebecca," he said, his voice carrying that particular edge of command wrapped in forced pleasantness. "Your mother and I need to speak with you. Now, in the study." 12 pairs of eyes turned to watch as I set down the water pitcher I'd been holding and followed my parents into my father's wood-paneled study, Jason trailing behind us. The door closed with a heavy click. My father didn't waste time with pleasantries. "We need the house." I blinked, certain I'd misheard. "I'm sorry, what?" "The house. That property you're living in. We need it." His tone suggested this was obvious, reasonable, not worth questioning. "You want me to give you my house?" I said it slowly, making sure I understood correctly. "Don't be dramatic," my mother cut in, her voice syrupy with manufactured patience. "We're not asking you to give it to us. We need to use it as collateral for some investments your father is making. The family needs it. We're going through a challenging period financially, and that property could solve a lot of problems." My mind reeled. They wanted me to hand over the deed to my home, the place I'd designed from the foundation up, the space that was entirely, completely mine, so they could gamble with it in whatever scheme my father was running this time. "No," I said quietly. The word hung in the air like smoke from an extinguished candle. My father's expression darkened. "Excuse me?" I said no. "That's my house. I'm not using it as collateral for your business deals." What I didn't say, what I couldn't say in front of Jason, who would absolutely use it against me, was that the house wasn't just mine. 9 years ago, when I was 26 and had just started my own architectural consulting firm, my Uncle Richard had called me to his lawyer's office. He was my father's younger brother, the black sheep of the family who'd made his fortune in sustainable energy and had always been kind to me when no one else was paying attention. He'd just been diagnosed with the ALS that would take him within the year. "I'm investing in your first major project," he'd told me that day, sliding paperwork across the desk. $500,000, seed money for that mixed-use development you've been planning. No interest, no repayment schedule. You pay me back when you can, if you can. And Rebecca, I need you to promise me something. Don't tell them. Let them think you did it all yourself. Because when the time comes, and it will come, when they show you who they really are, your success will prove who you really are. Someone who earned it. Someone they can't touch." I'd kept that promise for 9 years. And now, standing in their study with their expectant faces and my brother's smirk, I understood exactly what Uncle Richard had meant. "After everything we've done for you," my father started, his voice rising. After everything we've sacrificed? What exactly have you sacrificed for me? The words came out sharper than I intended. That's when his hands came up, fast and hard. Not a slap, a push. Both palms against my shoulders, forceful enough to send me stumbling backward into the credenza. I heard the crash of my grandmother's antique vase hitting the hardwood floor, felt the sharp pain in my hip where I'd collided with the furniture. The study door flew open. Someone must have heard the crash. Suddenly there were people in the doorway, faces frozen in shock and discomfort. No one moved to help me. No one said, "That's not okay." They just stared. Uncomfortable witnesses who would rather pretend they hadn't seen anything than risk getting involved. I pushed myself up from the floor, ignoring the pain in my hip and the burn of humiliation. I walked past my mother's crocodile tears, past Jason's carefully neutral expression, past the guests who were already mentally rehearsing how they'd describe this scene at their next brunch gathering. I grabbed my coat from the front closet, walked through that perfectly decorated entryway with its 15-foot Christmas tree and imported ornaments, and got into my car with hands that shook so badly I could barely start the engine. Then I pulled out my phone and dialed the number I'd been saving for 3 years. The number of a man who'd given it to me at a professional conference and said, "If you ever need help with family legal issues, and I suspect you will, call me. I'll be ready." He answered on the second ring. "Rebecca," Michael Torres said, and I could hear something in his voice. Not quite satisfaction, not quite sadness, but something like inevitability, like he'd known this call would come eventually. "He pushed me," I said, my voice surprisingly steady, "in front of witnesses, and they want my house." There was a pause. Then Michael spoke again, and this time his voice was steel wrapped in silk. "Rebecca, it's time. Come to my office tomorrow morning. Bring nothing. I have everything we need." As I sat in my car with the phone pressed to my ear, Michael's words echoing in my head, I realized something I'd been avoiding for years. This moment had been inevitable since I was a teenager. The push wasn't the beginning. It was just the first time my father had been careless enough to do it where people could see. The pattern started long before I was old enough to understand what was happening. I have this memory from when I was 8, my first clear recollection of realizing something was fundamentally broken in my family. It was the regional art competition, and I'd spent 2 months creating a mixed media piece about urban renewal and green spaces. The judges were so impressed they'd awarded me first place and invited me to display it at the state level. When they announced my win, I scanned the audience for my parents' faces, desperate to see them smiling, to hear them say they were proud. They weren't there. They'd gone to Jason's little league game instead, even though Jason was 5 years old and playing in a recreational league where the primary activity was picking dandelions in the outfield. When I got home that evening clutching my blue ribbon and certificate, my mother glanced up from helping Jason with a coloring book and said, "Oh, that's nice, dear. Put it on the refrigerator." The ribbon stayed there for exactly 1 day before it disappeared, replaced by one of Jason's crayon drawings of a stick figure family where I was notably absent. I learned to stop expecting them at my events after that. When I made the honor roll every semester in middle school, they'd nod absently and remind me that grades weren't everything. When Jason brought home a C+ in 8th grade, they threw him a celebration dinner because he'd really applied himself this time. I understood the rules. Achievement was expected from me, irrelevant when received. Any minimal effort from Jason deserved parades and presents. The family photo albums tell the story more clearly than words ever could. I spent an afternoon once when I was in my 20s, flipping through them during a visit home. In photo after photo, I'm positioned at the edge of the frame, slightly out of focus, or cropped out entirely. There are dozens of pictures where you can see my shoulder or the edge of my dress, holidays where I'm mentioned in the caption but absent from the image. Meanwhile, Jason is centered, well-lit, perfectly captured in every moment. It was as if the family photographer had been given explicit instructions. Make sure Rebecca is removable. And they did remove me. The official Sullivan family portrait that hung in their living room for 10 years featured my parents and Jason in elegant poses against a burgundy backdrop. I wasn't in it. not because I wasn't there for the photo session. I was standing awkwardly to the side, while the photographer adjusted lights and angles. But when my mother ordered the prints, she'd selected the shots taken during my bathroom break. "You were blinking in all the others," she'd explained when I asked. "We didn't want to waste money on reprints." But it was my mother's jealousy that poisoned everything most deeply. I didn't understand it when I was young. I just knew that whenever I wore something she considered too attractive, she'd find a reason to criticize it. "That color makes you look washed out." "Oh, that style isn't flattering on your figure. Are you sure you want to wear your hair like that?" When I was 16 and a boy from my physics class asked me to prom, she spent the entire week before telling me I needed to be careful. That teenage boys only wanted one thing, that I shouldn't get ideas about myself just because someone showed me attention. She made me feel dirty for being noticed, ashamed for being wanted. I didn't realize until much later, until I found photographs of my mother as a young woman, that I looked almost exactly like her at that age. Same angular features, same auburn hair, same way of holding my head when I was thinking deeply about something. But where I saw intelligence and potential in those old photos of her, she must have seen only loss. Every time she looked at me, she was confronting the woman she used to be, the dreams she'd abandoned, the life she'd traded for security and status. She'd been accepted to a prestigious art school when she was 19. I learned from Uncle Richard before he died. She'd wanted to be an industrial designer, had real talent according to him. But she'd met my father instead, gotten pregnant quickly, and married even quicker. The art school acceptance letter went into a drawer and stayed there. By the time I came along, whatever fire had driven her was long extinguished, replaced by a cold determination to control everything around her, since she couldn't control her own disappointment. So she controlled me instead. Every career choice I made, she questioned. "Architecture? That's such a male-dominated field. Wouldn't you rather do something more suitable?" Every relationship I pursued, she undermined. "He seems nice, but are you sure he's serious about you? Men can be so unreliable." Every success I achieved, she diminished. "Well, that's good, but don't let it go to your head. Pride comes before a fall." She needed me to stay small, uncertain, dependent on her approval. Because if I succeeded, really succeeded, it would prove that she could have done the same if she'd just been brave enough. But the cruelest betrayal, the one I didn't discover until it was almost too late to fix, was what my father did when I was 19. I was a sophomore in college, focused on my architectural studies and internship applications, completely oblivious to the fact that my father was using my social security number to open credit card accounts and take out personal loans in my name. My credit was perfect because it was non-existent, a blank slate he could exploit without my knowledge or consent. He was careful about it. The bills went to a P.O. box he'd opened in my name. He made minimum payments to keep the accounts from defaulting immediately. For 3 years, I had no idea I was accumulating a financial history I'd never consented to, debts I'd never incurred. It wasn't until I was 22, trying to lease my first apartment after graduation, that the property manager pulled my credit report and looked at me with confusion. "It says here you have $23,000 in outstanding credit card debt and 3 delinquent personal loans. Is that accurate?" I'd sat in that rental office, staring at the report with my name on it, reading about accounts I'd never opened, purchases I'd never made, furniture for their lake house, a boat my father had bought, casino cash advances, all in my name, all destroying the credit score I didn't even know I had. When I confronted my father, he was dismissive. I had some temporary cash flow problems. "I made the minimum payments, didn't I? You should be thanking me for building your credit history." When I pushed back, when I demanded he take responsibility, he got angry. "After everything we've done for you, you're going to nickel and dime your own father? Family helps family, Rebecca." But we weren't family in any meaningful sense of the word. We were a hierarchy where I existed as a resource to be extracted, a bank to be robbed, a person whose identity could be borrowed whenever convenient. I spent the next year and a half disputing charges, filing police reports that went nowhere because it's a family matter, slowly rebuilding credit that should never have been damaged in the first place. And I learned something crucial. They didn't see me as their daughter. They saw me as property, something they owned, something they could use however they needed. That was the first thing they stole from me. My financial future, my clean slate, my chance to build a life without starting from a position of debt and damage. But it wasn't the last. I met Michael Torres 3 years ago at a professional conference on sustainable urban development. He was 48 then, with salt and pepper hair and the kind of quiet intensity that made you pay attention when he spoke. He had a reputation in legal circles as the attorney who took on cases other lawyers wouldn't touch. The family exploitation cases, the financial abuse situations, the complex scenarios where money and manipulation tangled together in ways that destroyed lives. We'd been on the same panel discussion about ethical considerations in family-owned development firms. During the Q&A, someone asked about conflicts of interest when family members were also business partners. I'd watched Michael give an answer that was both legally precise and deeply empathetic about how family relationships could become weapons when money was involved. After the panel, he'd approached me. "You gave good answers today, but you apologized 4 times in 10 minutes. Sorry if this is off topic. Sorry to disagree. Sorry if I'm wrong, but who taught you to apologize for having expertise?" The question had stunned me into silence. He'd continued, his voice quiet enough that only I could hear. "I've been practicing law for 23 years. I recognize the signs. The way you positioned yourself at the edge of the stage instead of center where the moderator put you. How you downplay your own projects when they're clearly innovative work. That research you mentioned was groundbreaking, but you framed it like you were guessing. The way you check exits in every room like you're always calculating an escape route." He'd leaned closer. "Someone hurt you. Someone still is." I denied it, of course. Made excuses. My family is just traditional. They have high standards. But Michael hadn't pushed. He'd simply handed me a card with his private number written on the back. "When you're ready to fight," he'd said, "call me. I'll be ready." That was 3 years ago. I'd kept the card in my wallet all this time, moving it from one to the next, never quite throwing it away, but never calling either. Until tonight, sitting in my car outside my parents' house with my hip throbbing from where I'd hit the credenza. Now, the morning after Christmas, I sat in Michael's downtown office as winter sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city I'd helped reshape with my buildings. He looked exactly as I remembered. Maybe a few more gray hairs, but the same fierce intelligence in his eyes. "I've been preparing for this longer than you know," he said, opening a filing cabinet and extracting 4 thick folders. "Come to my office today. Bring nothing except the truth. I have everything else we need." He spread documents across his mahogany desk. Bank statements, property records, business filings, email printouts, credit reports, forensic analysis. Years' worth of documentation, meticulously organized and annotated. I stared at the papers, not understanding how he could possibly have all this. 6 years ago, Michael explained, a woman named Jennifer Martinez hired me. She'd invested $150,000 in one of your father's commercial real estate ventures through his investment firm. The project never materialized. The money disappeared. Jennifer suspected fraud but couldn't prove it. The paperwork was too convoluted, too carefully structured to hide the theft. He tapped one of the folders. I took the case, started digging, found evidence of a pattern. Your father would lure investors with promises of guaranteed returns, use their money to pay off previous investors, pocket the difference. A classic Ponzi scheme, but small-scale enough to stay under regulatory radar. He was good at finding victims who wouldn't make noise, people who were embarrassed about being duped, people who had too much to lose by going public. What happened? I asked. Your father has powerful friends, business partners who owed him favors or feared his retaliation. One by one, my witnesses got cold feet. Jennifer herself eventually dropped the case after her daughter received an anonymous letter suggesting her college scholarship might be reconsidered if the family continued causing trouble. Michael's expression hardened. I was forced to close the investigation, but I didn't close my files. I kept monitoring, collecting news articles about his business deals, tracking property transfers, noting patterns. I knew he'd eventually go too far, that his greed would overcome his caution. I just needed the right plaintiff, someone who had legal standing to sue, someone he'd victimized so thoroughly that a jury would see through his charm, and most importantly, someone brave enough to withstand the fight. He looked at me directly. When you stood up at that panel 3 years ago and talked about your work, I recognized your name immediately. Thomas Sullivan's daughter. And I saw in you exactly what I'd been waiting for. Intelligence, resilience, and wounds deep enough that when you were finally ready to confront the source, nothing would stop you. I felt a chill run through me. You've been watching my family for 6 years, waiting for me. Not just watching your family, Michael said quietly. Documenting everything. Building a case. And yes, waiting for you to be ready. He pulled out another folder, this one marked with red tabs. 3 months ago, I hired a private investigator, a former FBI agent named Sarah Chen. She's been monitoring your parents' financial activities, their social media, their business dealings. When I saw the Christmas party invitation posted on your mother's Facebook, the one where she tagged you and made that comment about family traditions, I knew something was coming, so I had Sarah increase surveillance. Michael opened his laptop and turned it to face me. Security camera footage from a neighbor's house across the street from my parents' estate. The timestamp showed last night, 8:47 p.m. I could see myself walking out the front door, could see the way I'd stumbled slightly, favoring my left hip. Your neighbor, Mrs. Patterson. She's actually been worried about you for years, Michael said. She gave us access to her security system. We have footage of you arriving, footage of the confrontation visible through the study windows, and footage of you leaving. We have evidence. I sat back, overwhelmed. You've been building a case for 6 years. I've been building an airtight case, Michael corrected. One they can't lie their way out of, can't minimize, can't explain away as normal family dynamics. Because Rebecca, what they've done to you isn't family drama. It's crime. Multiple crimes. And now we have everything we need to prove it. Over the next 3 days, Michael assembled a team that transformed years of careful documentation into a legal weapon. He brought in Marcus Kim, a forensic accountant who specialized in financial fraud, to trace every dollar my father had stolen from me and identify patterns in his schemes. Marcus spread the documents across Michael's conference room table, his expression growing darker as he uncovered the full scope of the theft. It's not just identity theft, Marcus reported on the second day. Your father took out 3 separate home equity loans against properties you own, properties you purchased with your own money. He forged your signature, forged property documents, created fake notarizations. If you'd missed payments on debts you didn't know existed, you could have lost everything to foreclosure. I felt ice in my stomach. How much? $340,000 total across the 3 loans. All the money went into his business accounts, then disappeared into what looks like casino transactions and personal expenses. There's no legitimate business use we can identify. Michael also hired Jennifer Wu, a data analyst who specialized in organizing evidence for major trials. Jennifer took years of documentation and transformed it into visual presentations, timelines, flowcharts, and summaries that would be comprehensible to juries and judges. She created a comprehensive timeline showing the pattern of abuse from my college years through the present, with every instance marked and cross-referenced. The private investigator, Sarah Chen, did something even more valuable. She identified 5 other victims of my father's business schemes. People who'd lost money in real estate deals that never materialized, investments that disappeared, partnerships that turned out to be sophisticated theft. These people had been too intimidated to come forward, afraid of my father's connections and potential retaliation. With their testimony, Michael explained, this stops being a family dispute and becomes criminal conspiracy. The pattern is undeniable. Your father has been doing this to multiple people for over a decade. We coordinated with Lisa Morrison, a prosecutor from the district attorney's white-collar crimes division, who agreed to review our case. Lisa spent 2 days examining everything and confirmed we had enough for multiple felony charges: identity theft, fraud, forgery, assault, attempted extortion, and potentially even RICO violations, if we could prove my father's business dealings constituted an ongoing criminal enterprise. As our team worked, Michael and I developed our strategy in his office late one evening, Chinese takeout containers scattered across his desk. Three-pronged approach, Michael said, writing on his whiteboard. First, criminal charges through the district attorney's office, plus civil lawsuits for damages, restitution of stolen money, and compensation for emotional distress. Second, I added, public exposure. We control the narrative from the start. Media coverage before they can spin it. That investigative journalist you mentioned, the one who covers white-collar crime, we give her the full story. We make sure everyone in this community knows exactly what Thomas and Catherine Sullivan did to their daughter for 16 years. And third, Michael prompted, community restitution, I said, the idea crystallizing as I spoke. I don't just want them punished. I want to help the people they hurt who couldn't fight back. Those other victims Sarah identified. We help them file charges, recover losses if possible. And we set up resources for other people trapped in similar situations. Financial abuse hotlines, legal aid, education programs. We turn this into something larger than personal revenge. Michael studied me for a long moment. This isn't just about getting justice for yourself anymore. It never was, I said quietly. Uncle Richard's last words to me were that I was meant to build something better than what they tried to make me. This is how I do that. By making sure other people have the tools to escape the families that are destroying them. Michael smiled, and it was the fierce, proud smile of someone watching a mentee exceed expectations. Then let's begin. That night, as I drove home to my house, the house they'd tried to steal, with my laptop full of evidence and Uncle Richard's memory giving me strength, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Not just anger or determination, but certainty. Absolute certainty that what I was doing was right, that the years of enduring and documenting had been worth it, that the moment Uncle Richard had prepared me for had finally arrived. I called Michael just before midnight. File everything tomorrow. Contact the DA, the media, the courthouse. I'm ready. Are you sure? He asked. Once we start this, there's no going back. Your family will fight dirty. I'm sure, I said. Let's show them exactly what happens when you underestimate the person you tried to destroy. And the next morning, the first domino fell. The morning after I gave Michael the authorization, he filed emergency motions with 4 financial institutions. First Pacific Bank, where my father had his primary business accounts. Sterling Credit Union, where he'd opened several of the fraudulent loans in my name. Western National Bank, which held the 3 illegally obtained home equity loans. And Cascade Financial, where my family's trust accounts were held. Each motion included a comprehensive evidence package, copies of my identity documents, proof I'd never authorized the accounts, forensic analysis of the forged signatures, and my own sworn affidavit detailing the timeline of discovery and attempted theft. The legal process wasn't the dramatic overnight freeze I'd imagined from watching legal dramas. It was methodical, bureaucratic, frustratingly slow. Each bank had its own procedures, its own legal department that needed to review evidence, its own timeline for compliance. Michael had warned me this would take time. 10 days minimum, he'd said. Maybe 2 weeks. Banks move carefully when fraud allegations are involved. They need to verify everything, protect themselves legally, coordinate with law enforcement. We have to be patient. But while we waited, my parents weren't being patient at all. Marcus, the forensic accountant, had set up monitoring on the accounts we knew about, watching for suspicious activity. On day 4, he called Michael's office in the middle of our strategy meeting, his voice tight with urgency. They're moving money, he said. Thomas just initiated 2 wire transfers, $150,000 to an account in the Cayman Islands, and another $75,000 to what looks like a Swiss banking corporation. He's trying to get assets offshore before we can freeze them. I felt my stomach drop, but Michael just smiled grimly. Let him try. He'd already anticipated this move. 2 weeks earlier, before we'd even confronted my parents at Christmas, Michael had filed a suspicious activity report with FinCEN, the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, a bureau of the U.S. Treasury Department that tracks money laundering and financial crimes. The report had flagged my father's accounts for potential fraud and identity theft, creating automatic alerts on any large or unusual transactions. When Thomas attempted those wire transfers, the system caught them immediately. The transactions were blocked before the money left U.S. soil, and automatic notifications were sent to the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. Instead of hiding his money, my father had just provided federal evidence of attempting to move potentially stolen funds out of the country. He just upgraded this from local fraud to federal investigation territory. Marcus said with something like admiration in his voice. That was spectacularly stupid. Over the next week, I watched the financial walls close in around my parents, with a satisfaction that felt almost physical. The banks, after reviewing Michael's evidence packages and conducting their own internal investigations, began freezing accounts one by one. First, the obvious ones. The credit cards and loans opened in my name. Then, the accounts my father thought were safe. His business checking account where evidence showed he'd deposited funds stolen from other victims. The joint savings account with my mother that had been funded partially with money from Uncle Richard's estate that should have come to me. The 3 home equity loans secured against my properties were canceled entirely. The banks acknowledged that the paperwork was fraudulent, the signatures forged, and that Rebecca Sullivan, me, had never consented to encumbering her properties. They apologized profusely for their failure to properly verify the documents initially, and assured me the debts would not appear on my credit report. By day 9, my parents had no access to liquid funds. I heard about what happened next through the community gossip network that Sarah Chen monitored carefully as part of her investigation. Thomas's mortgage payment bounced. The bank called, and he had to explain that there was a temporary issue with the account transfer. His country club membership fee, automatically withdrawn monthly, was declined. The club manager called personally, and Thomas had to request a payment plan, something that had never happened in the 22 years they'd been members. Catherine tried to use a credit card at her favorite boutique, the upscale place where she bought her designer clothes and had a personal shopper. The card was declined. She tried another, also declined. Finally, she had to call Thomas to bring cash, humiliating herself in front of the store owner she'd known for 15 years. Thomas wrote a check to their attorney, Mitchell Pierce, an expensive lawyer who specialized in defending white-collar criminals. The check bounced. Pierce called and very politely informed Thomas that he couldn't continue representation without a valid retainer. Thomas would need to pay in cash or certified check before Pierce would file any responses to the lawsuits that were coming. The Whisper network in their social circle noticed everything. The Sullivans, always so perfectly polished, so financially comfortable, were suddenly scrambling. People talked. Of course they talked. Mrs. Henderson mentioned to someone at her book club that she'd heard the Sullivans were having money troubles, that someone told her husband, who played tennis with Judge Morrison at the country club. Within 3 days, the entire community knew something was seriously wrong with Thomas and Catherine Sullivan's finances. On the 11th day after Christmas, January 5th, certified letters arrived at my parents' estate. I knew this because Michael had tracking numbers for all of them, and we watched the delivery confirmations pop up on his computer screen at 3:12 p.m. The first letter was from First Pacific Bank, informing Thomas and Catherine that accounts ending in 7821, 4456, and 9903 were frozen pending investigation of fraud allegations. The second was from Sterling Credit Union, notifying them that all loan products in the name of Rebecca Sullivan had been closed, and the associated debts, totaling $89,000, had been reassigned to Thomas and Catherine Sullivan as the actual users of the funds. The third letter was from Michael's law firm, formally notifying them of pending civil lawsuits for identity theft, fraud, conversion of estate assets, and emotional distress, with damages sought exceeding $750,000. The fourth letter was the one I'd been waiting for. It came from the district attorney's office, informing Thomas and Catherine that a criminal investigation had been opened, based on evidence of identity theft, financial fraud, forgery, and assault. They were advised to retain criminal defense counsel immediately and to expect contact from detectives within 48 hours. I wasn't there to see their faces when they opened those letters, but Jason called me that evening. He'd apparently moved back home after his latest business venture, something involving cryptocurrency that I'd never quite understood, had collapsed spectacularly. "Dad's in his study with all the letters spread out on his desk," Jason said, his voice shaking. "He's just sitting there, not moving. Mom's been on the phone all day. calling everyone she knows, trying to find someone who can fix this. But nobody's returning her calls. Everyone's distancing themselves. "Do you understand why this is happening?" I asked. There was a long pause. "I'm starting to," he said quietly. "I found some things. Documents. They did things I didn't know about." "Like what?" "Like using your name to take out loans. Like forging your signature on property documents. Mom kept a file in her closet. I think she was holding on to evidence in case she ever needed it against Dad. But it's all there. Everything you're probably accusing them of. It's all true, isn't it?" "Yes," I said simply. "I'm sorry," Jason whispered. "I know that doesn't mean much, but I'm sorry I never saw it. I'm sorry I was part of it." After we hung up, I sat in my house, the house my uncle had helped me build, the house they'd tried to steal, and felt something shift inside my chest. For 35 years, they'd controlled me through fear of disappointing them, of losing whatever scraps of approval they offered, of being alone. Now, they were the ones afraid of prison, of bankruptcy, of public humiliation, of losing everything they'd built on a foundation of lies and theft. The power dynamic hadn't just shifted, it had completely inverted, and this was only the beginning. But the public would soon know the truth. 4 days after the certified letters arrived, Michael called me with news that made my heart race. "Emily Rodriguez wants to publish tomorrow morning. Front page of the digital edition, above the fold in print. Are you ready for this?" Emily Rodriguez was a legend in investigative journalism. She'd spent 15 years exposing corruption, financial fraud, and systemic abuse in institutions that thought they were untouchable. She'd brought down a state senator, exposed a healthcare fraud ring, and revealed family court corruption that sent 3 judges to prison. When Michael had mentioned our case to her 2 weeks ago, back when we were still in the planning stages, Emily had been immediately interested. Parental financial abuse of adult children is one of the most under-prosecuted crimes in America, Emily had told me during our first interview. People understand elder abuse. They understand child abuse. But somehow, when the victim is an adult and the abuser is a parent, society tells them it's just family issues. It's not. It's crime. And your story needs to be told. We'd spent hours together over the past 2 weeks. She'd interviewed me extensively, reviewed every public document Michael could provide, spoken with experts on family exploitation and financial fraud, even talked to some of my father's other victims that Sarah had identified. She'd been meticulous, empathetic, and relentlessly thorough. Now her article was ready to publish. The Architectural Theft: How One Woman's Family Tried to Steal Her Life's Work. I gave her my permission, and the next morning at 6 a.m., the article went live. By 8 a.m., it had been shared 6,000 times. By noon, over 75,000 shares. By evening, it was trending on 4 different social media platforms and had been picked up by national news outlets. Emily's writing was devastating in its clarity. She laid out the timeline of abuse starting from my college years, describing the systematic identity theft, the forged signatures, the way I'd been trained to accept mistreatment as normal family dynamics. She detailed the financial crimes with specific dollar amounts and dates, making the theft concrete rather than abstract. She included quotes from experts explaining how parental financial abuse works, how it's hidden by family loyalty and shame, how victims often don't realize they have legal recourse. She interviewed forensic accountants who explained the sophistication of my father's schemes, prosecutors who confirmed the severity of the charges he was facing. But what made the article go viral wasn't just the facts. It was the way Emily framed my story as emblematic of something larger, the invisible theft that happens when families view certain members as resources rather than people. While Rebecca Sullivan was building a multi-million-dollar career through talent and determination, Emily wrote, her parents were simultaneously stealing her identity, sabotaging her opportunities, and planning to legally seize her assets through fraudulent means. She succeeded not because of her family, but in spite of them. She is the definition of self-made, someone who built everything from ground zero while the people who should have supported her actively worked to tear her down. The comments section exploded. Thousands of people shared their own stories of family financial abuse, of parents who'd stolen from them, siblings who'd been favored, opportunities that had been blocked by jealous relatives. The overwhelming majority of responses came from women who recognized themselves in my experience. My mother did this to me, opened credit cards, destroyed my credit, then told me I was selfish when I confronted her. I'm 48 years old, and I just realized my father's borrowing from me for 20 years was actually theft. This happened to my sister. Thank you for giving her language for what she experienced. The hashtag started within hours. Chaka stand. With Rebecca. Self-made, not self-destroyed. Chuck architectural justice. By the second day, my case was being discussed on morning talk shows, true crime podcasts, financial advice programs, legal analysis shows. I became, without quite meaning to, the face of a conversation America needed to have about family exploitation. Local news stations showed up at Michael's office, at my house, even at my parents' estate. I gave one carefully prepared interview to the local ABC affiliate, keeping my composure as I explained that I was speaking out not for revenge, but to help other people recognize financial abuse and know they had options. The clip played on the evening news for 3 straight days, and suddenly everyone in my community knew my face and my story. But more importantly, everyone knew my parents' faces and their crimes. The social consequences came swift and merciless. First, United Methodist Church, where my parents had been prominent members for 18 years, where my mother had led the women's ministry and my father had been on the building committee, sent a quiet but unmistakable message. Reverend Matthews called personally to suggest that, given the current circumstances, it might be best for everyone if the family took some time away from services while these matters are being resolved. Translation: don't come back. The Heritage Foundation, where my mother had been event coordinator for their annual charity gala, the social event of the season that drew donors from across the state, sent a formal letter requesting her immediate resignation. Given the serious nature of the allegations and the negative attention currently focused on your family, we feel it's in the organization's best interest if you step back from your duties. Catherine had loved that position. It had given her status, made her feel important, connected her to the wealthiest and most influential people in the region. Now it was gone. My father's business partnerships dissolved with remarkable speed. The men he'd golfed with, the investors he'd courted, the colleagues who'd attended his holiday parties, they all found reasons to distance themselves. Contracts were quietly terminated. Joint ventures were unwound. Phone calls went unreturned. Within 2 weeks, Thomas Sullivan went from well-connected businessman to social pariah. I heard about all of this through Jason, who called me every few days with updates. He'd moved out of their estate and into a small studio apartment, trying to figure out how to build a life separate from our parents for the first time in his life. Mom sits in the living room all day, Jason told me during one call. She doesn't get dressed. She doesn't answer the phone. I went by yesterday to pick up some things I'd left behind, and she was just sitting there in her bathrobe, scrolling through the comments on Emily's article over and over again. It's like she's torturing herself. And Dad? I asked. He's angry. He keeps saying it's all lies, that you're destroying the family out of spite. But I don't think even he believes it anymore. People he thought were friends crossed the street to avoid talking to him. The Mitchells, who've been their neighbors for 12 years, put their house up for sale. Dad thinks it's because they don't want to live next to accused criminals, even though the trial hasn't even happened yet. I felt a complex mix of emotions hearing this. Not quite satisfaction, not quite pity. Maybe recognition that this isolation, this social death, was a taste of what I'd experienced my entire life. I'd been invisible, erased, excluded. Now they were experiencing their own version of erasure as the community that had once elevated them now shunned them. But I took no joy in my mother's bathrobe despair or my father's angry isolation. What I felt was something sadder and more final. Confirmation that the relationships they'd built were as hollow as their version of family. The people who'd praised them, socialized with them, partnered with them, none of those people cared enough to ask if there might be another side to the story. They just disappeared, protecting their own reputations by cutting ties with anyone tainted by scandal. And then the police knocked on their door. I was sitting in Michael's office, reviewing documents for the upcoming civil case, when Detective James Park called. He'd been assigned to lead the financial crimes investigation, and over the past week, he and I had developed a professional rapport built on his methodical approach and my comprehensive documentation. "We're at their residence now," Detective Park said, his voice carefully neutral. "My partner and I will be conducting preliminary interviews. I wanted you to know the process is officially underway." Through Jason's subsequent phone calls and later through official channels, I learned exactly how that interview went. Detectives Park and Maria Gonzalez arrived at my parents' estate at 5:15 p.m. on a cold January afternoon. They were professional, polite, but unmistakably serious. Park was a 15-year veteran of financial crimes investigation. Gonzalez specialized in white-collar fraud and identity theft cases. Together, they'd seen every variation of family financial exploitation, every excuse, every deflection tactic criminals used when confronted. My father tried to control the situation immediately, standing in the doorway as if physical presence could intimidate them into leaving. "Do you have a warrant?" he demanded. "We're not here to search your home, Mr. Sullivan," Detective Park said calmly. "We're here to ask you some questions about allegations of identity theft, fraud, forgery, and assault. You're not under arrest, but we do need to speak with you and your wife. You're welcome to have an attorney present." My mother appeared behind my father, her face pale and puffy from days of crying. "This is harassment," she said, her voice shaking. "Our daughter is lying about us, trying to destroy our lives, and you're helping her." Detective Gonzalez pulled out a tablet and brought up documents on the screen. "Ma'am, we're not here based on allegations alone. We have substantial evidence: bank records, forged documents, witness statements, forensic analysis. This is a criminal investigation. We'd like you both to come to the station to provide formal statements." They went. What choice did they have? Refusing to cooperate would only make them look guilty. And my father still believed he could talk his way out of anything if given the chance to explain, to spin, to redirect blame. At the station, in separate interview rooms, the detectives presented their evidence methodically. My father sat across from Detective Park with his hastily retained attorney, actually Mitchell Pierce's junior associate, since Pierce himself had dropped them as clients, a young lawyer named David Chen, who looked like he'd been practicing for about 6 months and was clearly out of his depth with financial crimes. "Mr. Sullivan," Park began, sliding a loan application across the table. "This is a personal loan application dated May 3rd, 2019. It's in the name of Rebecca Sullivan. Is that your daughter's signature at the bottom?" My father barely glanced at it. "This is a misunderstanding. Sometimes in families we help each other with paperwork. I might have signed for her if she was busy." "Without her knowledge or permission?" Park asked. "She knew about it." Park slid another document across the table. "This is a sworn affidavit from your daughter stating she never authorized any accounts in her name, never gave you permission to use her identity, and only discovered the fraud when she tried to lease an apartment at age 22 and found her credit destroyed." "She's lying," my father said flatly. "Is she?" Park pulled out a forensic handwriting analysis report. We had 3 certified handwriting experts examine signatures on 18 different loan applications and property documents, all supposedly signed by Rebecca Sullivan. All 18 signatures were determined to be written by the same hand, a hand that does not match Rebecca's verified signature samples, but does match exemplars of your handwriting, Mr. Sullivan. The experts are prepared to testify to this in court with a certainty level of 99.2%. My father's attorney shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "That's not conclusive," Chen started. "We also have security camera footage," Park interrupted, bringing up a video on his tablet. "This is from Sterling Credit Union, dated March 15th, 2021. That's you, Mr. Sullivan, sitting at a loan officer's desk, filling out a home equity loan application. The name on the application is Rebecca Sullivan. At that exact time, your daughter was in Seattle for a professional conference. We have her hotel records, conference registration, and credit card receipts from Seattle restaurants. She was 800 miles away when you were applying for a loan in her name." The room went quiet. My father stared at the paused video showing his own face clearly visible as he sat at that bank desk. "This wasn't a one-time mistake," Park continued. "This was a systematic pattern spanning 14 years. The sophistication of the scheme, the duration, the the multiple institutions involved. This demonstrates clear intent and premeditation. And 6 months ago, you made a payment on one of these fraudulent accounts, which means the crime is ongoing. Identity theft is a continuing offense, Mr. Sullivan. Every transaction resets the statute of limitations. My father tried another angle, his voice taking on that familiar tone of self-righteous indignation. Even if I did use her information, which I'm not admitting, she's my daughter. Family shares resources. This is a civil matter, not criminal. It became criminal the moment you used her identity without consent, Gonzalez said from where she'd been standing by the door. And it became far more serious when you physically assaulted her and demanded her property. We have 12 witnesses who saw you push your daughter into furniture on Christmas evening. We have photographs of her injuries. We have testimony that you demanded she surrender her house deed. That's not a family disagreement. That's assault and attempted extortion. Down the hall in another interview room, my mother was having her own reckoning. She denied everything at first, claimed she knew nothing about the financial fraud, that Thomas had handled all the money matters, that she'd been deceived just like everyone else. But when presented with phone records showing she'd made calls to banks pretending to be me, when confronted with documents found in her closet that detailed the schemes, when shown evidence of her role in blocking my career opportunities, her denials crumbled into sobbing admissions wrapped in justifications about being afraid, about wanting to keep the family together, about not understanding how serious it was. I never meant to hurt her, Catherine wept. I just wanted what was best for the family. What was best for the family, Gonzalez said quietly. Or what was best for you. Jason was called in 3 days later for his own interview. He arrived with a pro bono attorney arranged through a legal aid clinic, looking exhausted and terrified. Detective Park was gentler with him, recognizing what Michael and I had come to understand. Jason was both complicit and victim, someone who'd been raised in the same toxic system, but had been given the golden child role instead of the scapegoat role. Jason, we have evidence that you were aware of some of your parents' activities regarding your sister. Credit cards used in her name, forged signatures on documents. Can you explain your knowledge of these situations? Jason's attorney started to speak, but Jason interrupted her, his voice breaking. They told me it was normal, that families help each other, that Rebecca had more than she needed and wouldn't notice. When I was 18 and got into trouble with my own credit cards, Dad said he'd help me if I helped him with some family business. I signed some documents. I thought they were legitimate estate planning forms. I didn't know they were. I didn't know. He looked directly at the camera they'd told him was recording. But I should have known. I should have asked questions. I should have protected my sister instead of protecting myself. The detectives documented everything. The interviews became official statements, evidence for the prosecution. Within a week, formal charges were filed. Thomas Sullivan faced 17 counts of identity theft, 14 counts of fraud, 3 counts of forgery, 1 count of assault, and 1 count of attempted extortion. Catherine Sullivan faced 11 counts of fraud, 2 counts of identity theft, and multiple counts related to conspiracy and obstruction of justice. Jason, given his cooperation and evidence of coercion from his parents, faced 3 lesser charges of accessory to fraud, with a recommendation for probation rather than prison time if he continued cooperating fully with investigators. Michael called me the evening the charges were announced. It's official. They're being prosecuted. Your documentation, your patience, your years of careful evidence collection, it worked. The system is finally protecting you. I sat in my house, looking out at the city lights, thinking about Uncle Richard and how he'd told me to build something better than what they'd tried to make me. This is just the beginning, I said. The trial is next. The trial is next, Michael confirmed, and we're going to win. But before the trial, there was one more revelation that would change everything I thought I knew about my family. The revelation came from the most unexpected source. My mother's sister, my Aunt Patricia, whom I'd met exactly twice in my entire life. She showed up at my house unannounced on a Tuesday evening in late February, 3 weeks before the trial was scheduled to begin. I almost didn't open the door. I'd been getting harassment from my parents' remaining friends and business associates. People who believed I was destroying a good family for attention or money. But something about the woman standing on my porch made me pause. She looked like my mother, but softer somehow. Same auburn hair, now graying. Same angular features, but without the sharp edges of bitterness and control. She was holding a worn leather folder and wearing an expression of profound sadness. "Rebecca," she said when I opened the door. "I'm Patricia Brennan, your mother's younger sister. We met when you were 7, and again when you were 12, though I doubt you remember. May I come in? I have something you need to know before the trial." I let her in, made tea, and listened as she told me a story I'd never heard before. A story my mother had spent 35 years hiding. "Your mother and I grew up in extreme poverty," Patricia began. "Our father was an alcoholic who disappeared when Catherine was 8 and I was 6. Our mother worked 3 jobs but could barely keep us fed. We lived in a trailer park outside the city, wore clothes from donation bins, sometimes went to school hungry because there was no food in the house." She pulled out old photographs from the leather folder. 2 young girls in threadbare dresses, standing in front of a rusted trailer. Catherine looked angry even then, defiant, like she was daring the camera to judge her circumstances. "Catherine was brilliant," Patricia continued. "Straight A's despite everything. She won a full scholarship to State University, got accepted into their design program. She was going to be an industrial designer, had this vision of creating products that would make everyday life better for people like us, people who struggled." "What happened?" I asked. "She met your father during her sophomore year. Thomas Sullivan from one of the wealthiest families in the state, heir to a real estate investment fortune. Catherine saw him as her ticket out. Not just out of poverty, but out of the shame of poverty. She got pregnant with you deliberately, I think, though she never admitted it. They got married, she dropped out of school, and suddenly she was Catherine Sullivan, society wife, member of the country club, volunteer at the Heritage Foundation." Patricia's expression hardened. "But she never escaped the shame. She just buried it. Changed our family history, invented dead parents who'd been middle-class professionals, created this entire backstory that erased our trailer park existence. When I tried to stay in her life, tried to maintain our relationship, she pushed me away, said I was a reminder of everything she'd left behind. She pulled out another document, a birth certificate. There's something else you need to know. Something Catherine never told you because she was terrified Thomas would find out." I looked at the birth certificate. It had my name on it, Rebecca Marie Sullivan. Birth date, April 15th. But the father's name wasn't Thomas Sullivan. It was Richard Sullivan. "Your Uncle Richard," Patricia said quietly. "He was Thomas's younger brother. Catherine had an affair with him during the first year of her marriage. You're Richard's biological daughter, not Thomas's." The room tilted. Uncle Richard, the man who'd invested in my career, who'd given me that crucial $500,000, who'd told me I was meant to build something better, he'd been my father. "Does Thomas know?" I managed to ask. "He found out when you were 8 years old," Patricia said, pulling out more documents. "DNA test results. That's when everything changed, wasn't it? When you were 8? When they suddenly started treating you differently. I thought back to that science fair, the one where they'd gone to Jason's recreational soccer game instead. That had been when I was 8. That had been when the overt neglect started, when the favoritism toward Jason became impossible to ignore. Thomas couldn't leave," Patricia explained. "A divorce would have cost him too much. Money, reputation, social standing. So he stayed, and he punished you for existing. Every achievement you had was a reminder that you weren't his daughter, that his wife had betrayed him, that he was raising another man's child. And Catherine punished you for looking like Richard, for having Richard's intelligence, for being living proof of her affair." I sat there, trying to process this. Every interaction with my parents suddenly made terrible sense. My father's, Thomas's, escalating cruelty. My mother's jealousy disguised as concern. The way they'd both seemed to resent my success, as if it was a personal insult rather than something to celebrate. "Richard knew," Patricia said. "He found out about 5 years before he died. That's why he helped you, why he invested in your career. He wanted to give you what he couldn't give you as your father: support, belief, opportunities. He made me promise that if anything happened to him, if things ever got bad with Thomas and Catherine, I'd tell you the truth. She handed me the leather folder. Everything's in here. DNA tests, Richard's letters acknowledging paternity, documents showing he'd set up a trust fund for you that Thomas tried to access and couldn't. Richard protected you the only way he knew how, with money and legal structures. But he also left you something else. She pulled out an envelope, yellowed with age, my name written across the front in handwriting I recognized from those investment documents Uncle Richard had shown me all those years ago. He wrote this 2 weeks before he died. He wanted you to have it when you were ready to know the truth. I opened the letter with shaking hands and began to read. My dearest Rebecca, if you're reading this, then Patricia has done what I asked. She's told you who you really are, who we really are to each other. I'm sorry I couldn't be your father in the ways that mattered. I'm sorry I had to watch from the sidelines while Thomas treated you like property and Catherine treated you like competition. But know this, every moment I spent with you, every conversation about your dreams and goals, every dollar I invested in your future, that was me being your father in the only ways I could. You have my mind, my determination, my ability to see possibility where others see obstacles. You have my belief that what we build should make the world better, not just make us richer. You have my stubborn refusal to accept that circumstances of birth should determine worth. Thomas will try to destroy you because every time he looks at you, he sees his own inadequacy. Catherine will try to diminish you because every time she sees you succeed, she's confronted with the choices she made out of fear instead of courage. But you, Rebecca, you are meant to fly. Build something beautiful. Build something that matters. Build something that proves worth isn't determined by whose name is on a birth certificate, but by whose values guide your actions. I'm so proud of you. I always have been. I always will be. With all my love, your father, Richard. I sat there with the letter in my hands, tears streaming down my face, understanding finally clicking into place. Uncle Richard, my father, had been preparing me for this moment since I was 26 years old. Every piece of advice, every investment in my career, every word of encouragement had been a father trying to give his daughter the tools she'd need to survive the people who'd tried to destroy her. Patricia stayed with me that evening, filling in details, answering questions, showing me photographs of Richard I'd never seen, pictures of him at my age, showing the resemblance I'd never noticed before. The same eyes, the same expression when deep in thought, the same way of holding his head. What do I do with this? I asked her. The trial starts in 3 weeks. That's up to you, Patricia said. But I think Richard would want you to use every truth available. Not for revenge, he wasn't vengeful, but for justice and for freedom. The next morning, I called Michael and told him everything. We added one more element to our case. Proof that Thomas Sullivan had known for 27 years that I wasn't his biological daughter, and had used that knowledge to justify systematic abuse and exploitation. It wasn't about paternity. It was about premeditation. Evidence that his crimes weren't impulsive mistakes, but calculated punishment for a situation I'd had no control over. This changes everything, Michael said. This proves malicious intent. This proves he knew exactly what he was doing and why. The trial was no longer just about theft and fraud. It was about a man who'd spent 27 years punishing a child for the sin of existing. And I was about to make sure everyone knew exactly what he'd done. The trial began on March 15th in the Superior Court of Washington County. Judge Helen Ostroff presiding, a woman in her early 60s, with a reputation for running a tight courtroom and having zero tolerance for financial crimes that victimized family members. I sat in the courtroom every day, watching as the prosecution methodically presented the evidence I'd spent years collecting. Bank records, forged signatures, audio recordings, witness testimony. The forensic accountant's charts showing the pattern of theft. The handwriting expert explaining with scientific certainty that Thomas Sullivan had signed my name on 18 separate loan applications. Thomas's attorney. He'd managed to hire Arthur Weinstein, an expensive criminal defense lawyer from Seattle, tried to paint it as family misunderstanding, tried to claim that informal money sharing was normal in close-knit families. But the jury saw through it. The security camera footage was devastating. Watching my father sit at that bank desk, filling out a loan application in my name while I was 800 miles away. Watching him sign my name with practiced ease, like he'd done it dozens of times before. Which, of course, he had. The other victims testified. Jennifer Martinez, who'd lost $150,000 in one of my father's Ponzi schemes. Robert Chen, who'd invested $200,000 in a commercial development that never existed. Sarah Foster, who'd been promised returns on a guaranteed real estate investment and lost her retirement savings. Each testimony painted a picture of a man who saw other people, even his own family, as resources to be exploited. But the most powerful testimony came from Patricia. She took the stand on day 7 of the trial, and the courtroom went silent as she explained the family history my mother had hidden. The poverty, the trailer park, the systematic erasure of her past. And finally, the truth about my paternity. Catherine got pregnant with Rebecca deliberately, Patricia testified. She saw Thomas as her escape from poverty, but she loved Richard. The affair lasted 6 months before Thomas found out. When Rebecca was 8, Thomas demanded a paternity test. When it came back showing Richard was the biological father, Thomas didn't leave. He stayed and made both Catherine and Rebecca pay for the betrayal. Michael entered Richard's DNA test results into evidence, along with his letter to me. The prosecution had to establish motive. Why would a father systematically destroy his own daughter's life? The answer: because she wasn't his daughter, and he wanted her to suffer for that fact every day. Catherine took the stand in her own defense, a decision Arthur Weinstein had apparently advised against, but she'd insisted on. She wore a conservative suit, minimal makeup, the image of a grieving mother falsely accused. But under Michael's cross-examination, that facade crumbled fast. "Mrs. Sullivan, isn't it true that you intercepted career opportunities meant for your daughter?" I was trying to protect her. Some of those positions were too demanding, too far from family. Protect her? Or protect yourself from seeing her succeed in ways you never did? Catherine's face flushed. That's not... I wanted what was best for her. Did you want what was best for her when you destroyed her credit by allowing your husband to open fraudulent accounts in her name? I didn't know about all of that. Michael pulled out phone records. These show 17 calls you made to various banks pretending to be Rebecca Sullivan. You activated credit cards, changed account information, authorized transactions. You were an active participant in the identity theft, weren't you? I was helping Thomas with family finances. You were helping Thomas steal from your daughter. Because every time you looked at her, you saw the poverty you came from and the affair you'd had. You saw your own failures, and you couldn't stand it. Catherine broke down on the stand, finally admitting what we'd all known. She made it look so easy. Everything I struggled with, everything I gave up, she just did it without even trying. It wasn't fair. That admission, it wasn't fair, became the defining moment of the trial. Jason testified as well, part of his cooperation agreement. He described growing up in a household where love was conditional, where parents pitted children against each other, where he'd been given every advantage not because they loved him more, but because I reminded them of their failures. They used me to hurt Rebecca, Jason said quietly. Every time they praised me, it was really about putting her down. Every time they gave me something, it was to show her she didn't deserve it. I thought I was special, but I was just a weapon they used against their own daughter. The trial lasted 3 weeks. On April 5th, the jury deliberated for 6 hours before returning with verdicts. Thomas Sullivan, guilty on all 17 counts of identity theft, all 14 counts of fraud, all 3 counts of forgery, guilty of assault, guilty of attempted extortion. Catherine Sullivan, guilty on all 11 counts of fraud, both counts of identity theft, guilty on conspiracy charges. The courtroom erupted. I heard Mrs. Henderson, the same woman who'd witnessed the Christmas push, whisper to her husband, "Thank God. Justice." At sentencing 2 weeks later, Judge Ostroff looked at my parents with undisguised contempt. "Mr. Sullivan," she said, "you spent 27 years punishing a child for circumstances beyond her control. You stole not just her money, but her opportunities, her peace of mind, her sense of safety. You are sentenced to 8 years in federal prison with eligibility for parole after 5. She turned to my mother. Mrs. Sullivan, you enabled, participated in, and executed financial crimes against your own daughter. You sabotaged her career out of jealousy and fear. You are sentenced to 5 years with eligibility for parole after 3. Jason received 2 years probation and 500 hours of community service, with the recommendation that he continue therapy and completely sever financial ties with his parents. The civil case concluded a week later. $890,000 in restitution plus legal fees to be paid from the forced sale of their assets. The estate sold at auction for less than they'd paid for it. Thomas's business was liquidated. They declared bankruptcy. Everything they'd built through theft and manipulation was gone. I felt no triumph watching their empire crumble, just a quiet sense of closure, like a long illness finally running its course. The media coverage continued for weeks. I became, briefly, a spokesperson for family financial abuse awareness. I did interviews on morning shows, spoke at legal conferences, wrote an op-ed for the New York Times about the need for better protections against parental identity theft. But more importantly, I used the restitution money to establish the Richard Sullivan Foundation, a nonprofit providing legal aid and financial counseling to victims of family exploitation. We helped 12 people in our first year get restraining orders, recover stolen money, and rebuild their credit. Patricia became the foundation's director. Richard would be so proud, she told me at our opening ceremony. You took their worst and made it into something that helps others. That's true justice. The question that remained was what to do about my relationship with Jason, and whether forgiveness was even possible. Forgiveness, I learned, wasn't a single decision, but a process that unfolded over months. Jason and I met for coffee 6 weeks after the sentencing, at a neutral cafe neither of us had history with. He looked different, thinner, older, like he'd aged 5 years in 6 months. He was working a genuine job for the first time in his life, something entry-level at a nonprofit that helped formerly incarcerated people find employment. Ironic, right? He said with a bitter laugh. I'm helping people who've been in the justice system when my own parents are about to be. We sat in uncomfortable silence for a while, both of us stirring coffee we weren't really drinking. I don't expect you to forgive me, Jason finally said. I know I was part of it, even if I didn't fully understand what was happening. But I want you to know I'm trying to understand now. I'm in therapy twice a week. I'm taking accountability for my actions. And I'm trying to figure out who I am when I'm not performing for their approval. What have you learned? I asked. That being the golden child was just a different kind of abuse. He said quietly. They didn't love me more. They used me differently. They praised me to hurt you. They gave me things to show you that you didn't deserve them. They never actually saw me as a person either. I was just a tool in their game. He pulled out a letter, handwritten on plain paper. I wrote this in therapy. My counselor said I should give it to you, but only if you're willing to read it. No pressure. I took the letter home and read it that evening. Rebecca, I'm sorry. I know those words aren't enough, but they're where I have to start. I'm sorry I believed their narrative about you, that you were too serious, too cold, too ambitious. I'm sorry I never questioned why you were always left out of family photos, why your achievements were dismissed while mine were celebrated. I'm sorry I didn't protect you. I'm sorry I participated in their schemes, even if I didn't fully understand them. I signed documents. I made calls. I stayed silent when I should have spoken up. I chose my own comfort over your safety, and that's unforgivable. I'm learning now that we were both victims of the same toxic system, just damaged in different ways. You were the scapegoat, criticized, controlled, stolen from. I was the golden child, praised, protected, enabled. Neither of us got to be real people. Neither of us got to be loved for who we actually were. I can't undo what happened. I can only promise you that I'm different now. I'm building a life based on honesty, instead of performance. I'm taking responsibility for my actions. I'm breaking the patterns they taught me. I don't expect us to be close. I don't expect you to trust me. But I want you to know that I see you now. Really see you. And I'm awed by your strength, your integrity, your refusal to become like them despite everything they did to you. You deserved better. You always did. Your brother, Jason. I cried reading that letter. Not because it fixed anything, but because it was the first time anyone from my family had truly seen the harm that had been done and taken responsibility for their part in it. Over the following months, Jason and I developed a careful relationship. Not close, not without boundaries, but honest. We met once a month for coffee. He never asked for money or favors. We talked about our childhoods with new understanding, about the patterns we were both working to break. I'm dating someone, he told me after 6 months. Her name is Maria. She's a social worker. She knows everything about our family, all the ugly truth. And she likes me anyway. How does that feel? I asked. Terrifying, he said honestly. And amazing. It's the first time I've been in a relationship where I don't have to pretend to be more than I am. That's growth, I said. And I meant it. 2 years after the trial, Patricia and I were working together at the Richard Sullivan Foundation when she shared something that changed my perspective entirely. Your father, Richard, he left you one more thing, she said, pulling out a safe deposit box key. He told me to give you this when you'd fully claimed your own identity, when you'd broken free completely. I think now is that time. The box contained architectural drawings, beautiful, detailed plans for a sustainable housing complex designed to provide affordable, dignified housing for families transitioning out of poverty. Richard had designed it himself decades ago, but never had the resources to build it. Attached was a note in his handwriting. Rebecca, if you're seeing this, you've won. You've broken free. You've become everything I knew you could be. Now I'm asking you to build this. Not for me, though I wish I could see it, but for the children like your mother, who grew up in poverty and shame. Show them that circumstances of birth don't determine worth. This is your inheritance. Not just money, but purpose. Build something that changes lives. With eternal pride, Dad. I spent the next year designing an updated version of Richard's vision. A mixed-use development with affordable housing, community spaces, job training facilities, and childcare. Everything families needed to build stable lives. I used my restitution money as seed funding, partnered with a nonprofit housing organization, and secured additional grants. Ground broke in March, 3 years after that Christmas push that had changed everything. At the groundbreaking ceremony, standing beside Patricia and Jason, watching local officials and community members celebrate this project, I felt something I'd been chasing my entire life. Not revenge, not vindication, but purpose. I'd taken the worst thing that had ever happened to me and transformed it into something that would help hundreds of families. I'd taken their theft and built generosity. I'd taken their abuse and built healing. That was the truest revenge of all, refusing to become what they tried to make me, and instead becoming everything they feared I would be. 2 months later, I received a letter from my mother. It was the first communication I'd had from either of my parents since the trial, forwarded through Michael's office. The envelope was worn, as if it had been written and rewritten many times. Inside, my mother's handwriting, still elegant despite the obvious tremor in some letters. Dear Rebecca, I know I have no right to contact you. I know these words won't undo decades of harm, but I'm writing because I've finally, after 3 years in prison, begun to understand what I did to you. In here, I've had time to think, time to remember the girl I used to be, the one who was smart and ambitious and wanted to design things that made life better. The girl I buried because I was so ashamed of where I came from. I punished you for being everything I gave up. Every time you succeeded without hiding, without pretending, without erasing yourself, it proved that I'd destroyed myself for nothing. I could have been brave. I could have kept my dreams and built a life on my own terms. Instead, I chose security over authenticity, and I made you pay for that choice every day of your life. What I did to you wasn't love. It wasn't protection. It was cowardice wrapped in control. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even know if I deserve the opportunity to earn it. But I want you to know that I see now what I couldn't see before. You are remarkable, not despite your circumstances, but because of how you responded to them. You are everything I could have been if I'd been as brave as you are. I'm sorry, Rebecca, for the opportunities I stole, for the credit I destroyed, for the love I withheld, for every time I chose my own fear over your well-being. I'm sorry I couldn't be the mother you deserved. Catherine. I read the letter 3 times. Dr. Martinez, the therapist I'd been seeing since the trial, asked me how it made me feel. Sad, I said. Not for them, for what could have been, for the mother I never had, and now never will. Do you want to respond? She asked. I thought about it for a long time. Finally, I wrote back. Not because I owed her a response, but because I needed to say these things for myself. Catherine, I received your letter. I appreciate the acknowledgement of harm, though it comes years too late to change what happened. I'm writing to tell you that I've made my choice. I choose to move forward without you in my life, not because I hate you, but because I've learned that forgiveness doesn't require reconciliation. I can release the anger without inviting back the people who caused it. You asked for something you can't earn back. My trust, my presence, my willingness to give you another chance to hurt me. I'm choosing myself instead. I'm choosing the life I've built, the relationships that are healthy and reciprocal, the peace that comes from boundaries. I hope you find whatever healing is possible for you in the time you have left. I hope you learn to forgive yourself, since that's the only forgiveness that will make a difference for you now. But I won't be part of that journey. My journey is my own, and it leads away from you. Take care of yourself. Rebecca. I sent the letter through Michael's office and asked him to make sure any future attempts at contact were blocked. Then I closed that door permanently. Not with anger, but with intention. Not as revenge, but as self-preservation. Some wounds don't heal through reconciliation. Some heal through distance. 3 years after that Christmas push, I stood in the completed Richard Sullivan housing complex, watching families move into their new homes, watching children run through the community garden, watching parents drop kids off at the on-site childcare before heading to the job training center. Jason was there, volunteering with his girlfriend Maria in the community programming. Patricia was giving a tour to potential donors, and I was watching from the rooftop garden, thinking about everything that had led to this moment. The theft, the documentation, the confrontation, the trial, the victory, the healing. All of it had led here, to this building that my father designed, that I built, that would serve hundreds of families for generations to come. My phone buzzed with a text from Michael. Proud of you, kiddo. Richard would be too. I smiled, looking out over the city I'd helped reshape with my buildings, and thought about the question Dr. Martinez had asked me during our last session. What does freedom feel like? Freedom feels like standing on the roof of a building you designed, knowing that every brick represents a choice you made freely. Freedom feels like building something that helps others break cycles you barely escaped yourself. Freedom feels like knowing your worth isn't determined by whether your family could see it, but by what you chose to build when they tried to tear you down. Freedom feels like finally, completely, being yourself without apology or performance. Freedom feels like this. Now I want to hear from you. Because stories like this don't end when the video stops. They continue in the conversations we have, the reflections we share, the courage we find to face our own difficult truths. Drop a comment below and tell me, have you ever had to set boundaries with family members who couldn't respect them? Have you experienced financial manipulation or emotional abuse from people who claim to love you? What would you have done differently if you were in Rebecca's position? Would you have built the case methodically like she did, or would you have confronted them sooner? Do you think Jason deserved a second chance, or should Rebecca have cut ties completely? And here's the question I'm most curious about. Should Rebecca have responded to her mother's letter at all? Or was closure something she needed to create for herself without their participation? If this story resonated with you, if it made you think about your own relationships, or gave you language for experiences you've struggled to name, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because I share stories like this every week. Stories about people who faced impossible situations and found unexpected strength. Stories that remind us we're not alone in our struggles, that justice is possible even when it takes time, and that the most powerful form of revenge is often simply refusing to let toxic people define who we become. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it, someone who's dealing with family dysfunction, someone who's questioning whether they're overreacting to mistreatment, someone who needs permission to choose themselves. And if you made it all the way to the end of Rebecca's journey, through the abuse, the documentation, the confrontation, the trial, the healing, leave a comment that just says, "I'm free. So I know you were here and this story meant something to you." Thank you for listening. Thank you for being part of this community. And remember, sometimes the only way to save yourself is to walk away from the life that tried to destroy you and build something so beautiful in its place that the whole world can see what you always were: worthy, capable, and free. You deserve better. You always did.